History of the human race has thousands of different conquests across ages, regions, and cultures, but it is difficult to find one that played such a decisive role in the future events as the conquest of Greece by the Roman Republic, as its effects echoed through the millennia. Welcome to our video that will cover the first Roman involvement in the Greek affairs, Fourth Macedonian Wars, Seleucid War, Aetolian War, and Achaean War. These long videos take forever to make, so please kindly consider sharing it in your social media. The year is 231 BC, and the Mediterranean world is a land of continuous warfare and political upheaval. Just 10 years before, the burgeoning power of the Roman Republic had defeated Carthage in the First Punic War, establishing naval dominance on the sea. In the east, the Hellenistic kingdoms, Macedon, Ptolemaic Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire vie for dominance over their border territories. Sandwiched between these greater polities are a number of smaller states, such as Pergamon and the nominally independent Greek city-states. This is the world of the late 3rd century BC, but soon a series of conflicts between two rising powers, Rome and Macedon, will change the fate of the region forever. The which was Illyria, currently modern Albania and Dalmatia, was regarded in the mid to late 3rd century as a thoroughly barbarian region, only half civilized by contact with its Greek and Macedonian neighbors. Though contact with the Greek world had led to a degree of urbanization in the south and along the coast, the region in a political sense was still made up of many small tribal chieftains. The population of Illyria had been regarded since their initial encounters as turbulent and warlike by the more traditionally civilized peoples who came to know them. From time to time, one of the many Illyrian tribes would gain a temporary hegemony over most of the others, and in the 200s and 30s, this was the Ardii. Ruled by their energetic king, Agron, they had forged a union of not just their own Illyrian peoples, but also prominent figures such as Demetrius, the Greek lord of Pharos. Coinciding with the rise of this new Illyrian power was the collapse of Epirus, whose once formidable strength had waned and whose monarchy fell. Taking advantage of this weakness, the Illyrians invaded and eventually managed to seize Epirote territory far south of the traditional border, climaxing with the seizure of Phoenice, the wealthiest city of the kingdom. Despite these successes, however, Agron perished soon after and was succeeded nominally by his son. In reality, it was his wife Teuta who wielded true power, quickly being appointed regent for her stepson. Her ascension did not stop Illyrian belligerence, and in her reign piracy increasingly became a major problem in the Mediterranean. Seizures of more southerly territories in Epirus had allowed the establishment of more staging points from which brigands could sail. This had been occurring for a long time already, but the increasing scale of the problem, the increasingly loud complaints of Roman merchants, and the economic impact of piracy on the Republic prompted the Senate to act. Uncharacteristically peacefully for the notoriously bellicose Romans, the initial senatorial reaction in 230 BC was not to send in the legions, but instead to send a diplomatic embassy of two brothers to investigate the situation. In the typically harsh style of Roman diplomacy, the Coruncanius brothers protested to Tutor about the increasing piracy and demanded that it cease immediately. The demand was not negotiable, and the Illyrians would have a chance to comply peacefully. Otherwise, it would be war. Tutor refused this demand, either because of her inability to control the actions of her decentralized tribal allies, or because she simply did not wish to bend to Roman demands. Whatever the case, this did not please the Romans, a situation made even worse by the murder of a Roman envoy, possibly by Tutor herself in the midst of the anger of the meeting, or on the journey home by those very pirates that the embassy had been dispatched to stop. While the death of the Roman envoy was the immediate trigger for war, the expansion of the Ardii tribe's power over the region was a deeper geopolitical cause. Rome did not want any powerful rival in the Adriatic. Late in the campaigning season of 229 BC, a massive Roman force of 22,200 ships bore down on the Illyrians. Though details of the short campaign are unknown, it is known that the Roman expedition was a complete success from north to south. Teutor's appointed governor of the recently conquered island of Corcyra, Demetrius of Pharos, went over to the Roman side almost immediately, while the Queen Regent's forces were defeated in the field. By spring of 228, Tutor had been forced into a peace treaty with the Romans, breaking her kingdom into weaker segments and forbidding ventures of piracy into the southern Adriatic Sea. The Romans withdrew their troops and left behind only their amicitia, or friendship, a benign-sounding term which would soon apparently become anything but that. In essence, being a friend of Rome included the de facto conditions of becoming an informal client state. A primary beneficiary of the peace of 228 was the defector Demetrius of Pharos, who was granted a small independent principality of his own, sandwiched between the remnant of the Ardeaean kingdom and the Greek cities. Despite these gains under Roman auspices, it seems that the ambitious Demetrius was not content to remain in his small kingdom, and shortly after the peace was finalized, he married Triteuta, the Ardeaean king's biological mother. By becoming the young boy's formal regent in this act, Demetrius of Pharos effectively recreated the powerful Illyrian kingdom abolished by Rome in the First Illyrian War. Even more boldly, he began to launch pillaging raids into the territory of Roman allied tribes. It could be that Demetrius was testing the water, and due to the lack of any Roman response, he believed they either could not or did not wish to intervene. This was an illusion, as the Romans were instead occupied by the Roman-Gallic War of 226 to 222 BC, and it would prove to be a fatal illusion for Demetrius. Further trying his luck, Demetrius set out with 90 light galleys in the summer of 220 BC on a grand piracy expedition, ravaging cities around the Adriatic Sea in blatant violation of the treaty 8 years before. He had finally gone too far, and Rome now decided that their former ally Demetrius now posed the same threat to Roman interests that Tutor had, and moreover wished to punish their friend for betraying them and not acting like a friend should. the disproportionately massive Roman action, which began in 219, was probably motivated by the Republic's desire to swiftly and decisively conclude the Illyrian situation before a new war with Carthage began, as it seemed like it might. Demetrius's strategy was to hold the fortresses of Demalum and Pharos itself, but the Romans took the former in only 7 days, while a rash sortie by Demetrius lost him Pharos. The man himself evaded capture because he had placed a squadron of hidden galleys in a secret cove, fleeing to them when the battle was lost. On these ships, he fled to the south, abandoning his family to Roman imprisonment and his men to death at Roman hands. Not long after, Demetrius reached the Adriatic port town of Actium, where the fleet of a great Hellenistic king, Philip V of Macedon, was anchored. When he arrived, the king welcomed Demetrius heartily, and he quickly became a key advisor. Meanwhile, the Romans once again withdrew all of their soldiers from the region, leaving no military presence. They once again left only their friendship behind, but had demonstrated to the great Macedonian kingdom to the south that they had the will to intervene in the east. Before continuing, we need to reverse time for a moment and briefly examine the history of Macedon after its would-be conqueror. Pyrrhus of Epirus died in Argos. The victor in that battle, Antigonus the Second Gonatas, was firmly in control of Macedon by 272 and had also established hegemony over the Greek city-states. Having gained the loyalty of his turbulent homeland, Antigonus II did his best to maintain it. He raised a great sacred mound to honor the graves of the Argead house, reorganized the provincial system to increase its efficiency, and was vigilant in keeping Macedonian coinage a high-quality currency. Making good use of Macedon's depleted resources and funds, Antigonus focused on access and mobility, extensively utilizing the Antigonid fleet and the great naval fortresses of Demetrius, Chalcis, and Corinth to ferry troops to strategic locations. An Athenian-led, Ptolemaic-supported attempt at shaking off Macedonian domination failed in the Cheremidian War from 268 to 281. Though Antigonus managed to quell this revolt, crucial fortresses such as the Acrocorinth were lost during his reign, which finally ended in 239 BC with his death. His successor, Demetrius II, ruled for a relatively uneventful decade, during which Macedon's situation weakened ever further, and he died in 229. The late king's own son, Philip V, was only a child at the time of his father's death, and Macedon could not afford a child ruler in such a perilous time. A regent was clearly required for the time being, and a distant Antigonid relation was chosen for the task, Antigonus Doson. As one of the lesser-known but more highly competent Macedonian kings during the 3rd century BC, Antigonus Doson began to raise the young Philip as his own son, and at the same time energetically set to campaigning in order to beat back Macedon's enemies. He first marched north and expelled the Illyrians from the kingdom, and then struck south and crushed the Aetolian League. After securing his borders, Antigonus proceeded to renounce all Macedonian claims south of the Thermopylae Pass, wisely hoping to consolidate and stabilize the situation in Macedon itself. The response of the army was to demand that Antigonus accept the title of king. While he did this, Philip V's rights to the throne were not usurped or taken away, and Antigonus swiftly appointed him the official heir. After another series of victories, which including the first ever seizure of Sparta by a foreign army, Antigonus III Doson perished in 221, leaving behind a resurgent, stable, and increasingly powerful Macedon to Philip V, who now ascended to the throne. Soon after taking the throne, Philip V and the Macedonian hegemony was once again challenged by the Aetolian League and its allies during the Social War of 220 to 217, who believed Philip was too young to be an effective ruler. It was during this war that Demetrius of Pharos arrived at the royal court. Cataclysmic events in the West now began to attract wider attention in the Mediterranean world. The Second Punic War had broken out in 218, and the Carthaginian general Hannibal successfully crossed the Alps to invade Italy. There, he had already defeated one Roman field army at the Trebia River, and, in the June of 217, he crushed another at Lake Trasimene in Etruria. Hearing of these massive Roman defeats, Philip V now began to consider expansion in the West at the expense of an apparently dying Roman Republic. This new direction was encouraged by Demetrius of Pharos, who, after being expelled from his Adriatic dominion by Rome, now argued that Philip should end the Social War, gain control of the Illyrian coast, and attack Italy himself. Accepting the military status quo and ending the war in Greece at Naupactus, Philip then drove the Illyrians from Macedon once again, and in the winter of 217 had a fleet of 100 light warships constructed. In summer of 216, the king made his first attempt at secured Illyria's coastal region, but fled home upon hearing news of an approaching Roman fleet. The decisive Roman defeat at Cannae was another crucial moment, as it prompted Philip to send envoys to Hannibal asking for a formal alliance. He no doubt wanted to join the winning side and make gains at Roman expense. The story goes that the envoy, Xenophanes, was captured by a Roman praetor on his way to speak with Hannibal, but managed to talk his way to freedom by stating that he was instead there to make peace with Rome. However, the unfortunate Xenophanes was captured again on his way back to Macedon, with the formal treaty with Hannibal in his possession. It was in this manner that the Romans learned of that new threat that faced them. Following the conclusion of the Punic-Macedonian Treaty, Philip aggressed further with new attacks against coastal Illyria, attacking Corcyra in 215. This intensified in 214 when a major offensive began. Philip's land army marched north into Illyria through Epirus, while 120 Macedonian galleys sailed up the straits of Otranto. In this campaign, Philip swiftly seized Oricum and besieged Apollonia, who called to Rome for help. With a strengthened Adriatic fleet, the Roman commander Lavinus now crossed the sea with 55 heavy Roman warships, lifted the siege of Apollonia, and drove the Macedonians away from Oricum, two crucial ports which could have been used as a staging point for an attack on Italy. After these victorious, Laevinus wintered his fleet in Oricum, while Philip burned his ships and retreated overland to Macedon. Philip continued attempting to gain a foothold in Illyria during 213 and 212, but was once again thwarted by the ever-increasing strength of Roman naval forces. Realizing that a direct attack on Italy was impossible, Philip then sought to gain an advantage by destabilizing Rome's allies on the eastern Adriatic coast, raiding the territory of Scerdylidas and the Partheni. In 211, the Romans were able to negotiate an alliance with a collection of Greek states, Aetolia, Sparta, Elis, and Pergamon, who began offensive operations against the Macedonians. Though Philip was able to win some victories against these enemies, the intervention of the mighty Pergamene fleet turned the tide against him, and soon his realm was under severe threat. From 210, Pergamene and Roman fleets operated jointly against Macedon in the Adriatic, and although they were unable to land forces on Macedonian soil itself, the situation was becoming precarious. After several years of stalemate, Philip was finally able to secure peace in 205, largely because Rome wanted to disengage from Greek affairs, while the war with Hannibal was still ongoing. This ended the First Macedonian War. Philip, now free of Rome, began to look eastward. Seeing opportunity in the decline of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, he launched campaigns into the Aegean and Asia Minor, hoping to expand Macedon's influence. This aggressive expansionism alarmed several states, most notably Rhodes and Pergamon, who appealed to Rome for help. In 200 BC, the Roman Senate declared war on Macedon once more, starting the Second Macedonian War. Rome dispatched an army under Publius Sulpicius Galba, and soon after, Titus Quinctius Flamininus took command. The Macedonian king Philip V mustered his phalanxes, but Rome was a different enemy than the fractured Greek states. At first, Philip tried to negotiate peace, but Flamininus insisted on Macedon withdrawing entirely from Greece, a demand Philip could not accept. In 197 BC, the two sides met at the Battle of Cynoscephalae in Thessaly. Here, the Roman Manipular Legion faced off against the Macedonian phalanx. At first, Philip's right wing pushed the Romans back, but his left wing was still forming on rough ground. Seizing the opportunity, Flamininus sent his troops to attack the exposed flank. The phalanx, mighty on flat open ground, became disorganized and collapsed. The Roman flexibility triumphed over the rigid Macedonian formation. Philip was forced to sue for peace. Under the treaty, Macedon lost most of its power, surrendered hostages, and paid indemnities. Rome declared the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games in 196 BC, a brilliant piece of propaganda that won them popularity. But in truth, Greece had simply exchanged one master for another. Rome was now the arbiter of Greek affairs, and Macedon was humbled. Rome's declaration of Greek freedom was a masterstroke of diplomacy, but not everyone was convinced of Roman altruism. The Aetolian League, who had been Rome's allies, grew resentful, believing they had not been rewarded enough for their contribution against Philip. They began to agitate against Rome and looked for outside support. Their answer came in the form of Antiochus the Great, king of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus had already campaigned successfully in the east, earning the title the Great, and now he turned his attention westward. In 192 BC, invited by the Aetolians, he crossed into Greece with an army, declaring himself the champion of Greek freedom. The Romans could not tolerate this. War was declared, and the Seleucid War had begun. In 191 BC, Antiochus fortified the pass at Thermopylae with 10,000 men, hoping to repeat the legendary stand of Leonidas. But unlike Xerxes' Persians, the Romans found ways around the pass. Consul Manius Acilius Glabrio led the attack. The Roman legions assaulted from the front, while allied troops outflanked the Seleucids through the mountains. Antiochus was routed and fled back. The Aetolian League, who had gambled on Antiochus, now paid the price. After their defeat, they were forced into humiliating submission to Rome. Once a powerful confederation, they were reduced to irrelevance. Other leagues and city-states took careful note. Resistance to Rome was futile. Meanwhile, Macedon under Philip V was licking its wounds. Though defeated at Cynoscephalae in 197 BC, Philip had not been destroyed. Rome allowed him to remain on the throne, but his kingdom was stripped of territory, forced to pay indemnities, and left under constant Roman scrutiny. Despite these limitations, Philip proved resilient. He reorganized his administration, reformed taxation, and sought to strengthen Macedon's economy. He rebuilt his army, though always under the watchful eye of Rome. Outwardly submissive, inwardly he dreamed of regaining Macedonian greatness. But his reign grew darker in his later years. Suspicion and paranoia poisoned his court. When Rome demanded hostages to guarantee his compliance, Philip sent his son Demetrius, who spent time in Rome and returned deeply influenced by Roman culture. The Senate praised him, fueling Philip's fears that Rome intended to use Demetrius as a puppet against him. Tragically, these fears consumed Philip. Convinced of his son's disloyalty and swayed by his other son Perseus, he ordered Demetrius executed on charges of treason. This act haunted Philip, who reportedly regretted it bitterly until his death in 179 BC. Perseus, the surviving son, now inherited the throne of Macedon. Intelligent, ambitious, and determined, Perseus positioned himself as the champion of Greek independence against Rome. He sought to restore Macedonian influence by cultivating alliances with disaffected Greek states, Thracians, and even some in Asia Minor. But Rome was not blind. The Senate watched Perseus carefully, suspicious of any attempt to rebuild Macedonian power. Tensions mounted, and soon these suspicions would erupt into open conflict. By the mid-2nd century BC, Greece was a tinderbox. Rome claimed to protect Greek freedom, but in reality acted as hegemon. Macedon, though weakened, was not yet finished, and many Greeks still longed to escape the grasp of foreign domination. The stage was set for the Third Macedonian War, a decisive struggle that would determine the fate of Macedon and Greece itself. Despite his many attempts to curry favor with the Romans and improve his own position, Philip V of Macedon had died in 179 BC. His son Perseus, who inherited the throne, was determined to restore Macedon's power and influence. Unlike his father, Perseus was not cowed by Rome. He quickly began to pursue policies that alarmed the Senate. He renewed contacts with Seleucid Syria, forged ties with Bithynia, and even secured marriage alliances with Epirus and Cappadocia. His attempts to strengthen Macedon's influence across the Greek world brought him into direct conflict with Roman interests. The final spark came when Perseus gained popularity among the Greeks by cancelling debts and supporting populist measures, presenting himself as the protector of Hellenic freedom. Rome interpreted this as a direct challenge. In 171 BC, war was declared. The Third Macedonian War had begun. At first, Perseus showed promise. He won a victory at the Battle of Callinicus in 171 BC, where his phalanx held firm against the Romans. But strategic indecision and hesitation plagued his campaign. Instead of pressing his advantage, Perseus lingered, allowing Rome to regroup. Over the next years, Roman armies campaigned in Greece under various commanders with mixed results. Perseus managed to hold out, relying on Macedon's strong defensive terrain and his powerful phalanx. Yet Rome's resources were vast, and Macedon's isolation grew. Allies abandoned Perseus under Roman pressure, and even within Greece, support was divided. In 168 BC, the decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Pydna. The Roman commander, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, faced Perseus's army. The Macedonian phalanx advanced with terrifying momentum, pushing back the Roman lines. For a moment it seemed as if Macedon might win. But then, as the ground grew uneven, the phalanx lost cohesion. Gaps opened in the once impenetrable wall of pikes. The Romans seized their chance. With unmatched flexibility, the maniples surged into the openings, engaging the phalangites at close quarters where their long sarissai were useless. The slaughter was catastrophic. Tens of thousands of Macedonians fell, while Roman losses were minimal. The phalanx, once the pride of Greek warfare, had been decisively broken by the Roman legion. Perseus fled the field and soon surrendered. The aftermath was brutal. Macedon was dissolved into 4 separate republics, forbidden from intermarriage or trade with each other. Its monarchy was abolished. Rome had finally destroyed Macedonian power. To drive the lesson home, the Romans marched into Epirus, whose people had supported Perseus, and enslaved 150,000 men, women, and children. Entire towns were stripped bare, their populations sold into slavery. The Third Macedonian War ended with Macedon's complete humiliation and the elimination of the last serious rival to Roman power in Greece. Yet even this was not the end. Discontent simmered, and soon another desperate revolt would break out. Although Macedon had been broken into 4 republics after Pydna, resentment and unrest continued to simmer. Rome's attempt to dismantle Macedonian identity failed, and within a generation, the people longed for the restoration of their kingdom. In 150 BC, a pretender named Andriscus appeared, claiming to be the son of Perseus. Charismatic and ambitious, he rallied support among the Macedonians, promising to restore their monarchy and independence. Remarkably, Andriscus defeated a Roman army in battle, sending shockwaves through the Mediterranean. But Rome responded with overwhelming force. In 148 BC, at the Battle of Pydna once again, the Romans crushed Andriscus's forces. The uprising was over, and this time Rome showed no mercy. Macedon was formally annexed as a Roman province, ending its long history as a kingdom. Yet the spirit of resistance spread. In southern Greece, the Achaean League had grown increasingly hostile to Roman interference. Bitter disputes, resentment of Roman freedom, and pride in their own traditions fueled anger. When Rome moved to impose further controls, the Achaeans erupted in open revolt. The war was short and disastrous. In 146 BC, the Roman general Lucius Mummius marched on Corinth, the jewel of the Achaean League. The Corinthians resisted bravely, but they were no match for Rome's legions. The city was stormed, its treasures looted, its men slaughtered, and its women and children sold into slavery. The once great city was burned to the ground. The sack of Corinth in 146 BC marked the symbolic end of Greek independence. In the same year, Rome also destroyed Carthage in the west. With both Greece and Carthage crushed, Rome stood as the unrivaled master of the Mediterranean world. And yet, paradoxically, while Rome had conquered Greece with the sword, Greece conquered Rome with culture. Greek philosophy, art, literature, and religion poured into Roman life. The Romans studied Homer, revered Plato and Aristotle, and filled their cities with Greek statues and architecture. As the poet Horace would later write, captured Greece took captive her savage conqueror. Thus ended the long struggle. From the Illyrian Wars and Macedonian Wars to the Seleucid and Achaean conflicts, Greece's political freedom was lost forever. But its cultural triumph endured, shaping Rome, and through Rome, the entire Western world.